Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for coming back to Listening In, the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society podcast. In this series, we want to give you the opportunity to listen in to some of the conversations that we are lucky enough to have every day, that is, with a variety of people and organisations all working in the field of mental health and well-being. Cherelle Mead is many things, both personally and professionally. As many of us are, of course, but what Cherelle does so well is wearing that, living that, and identifying wholeheartedly with that intersectionality and diversity that makes her a whole person. A counsellor, a supervisor, charity trustee, and now the NCPS Regional Representative for Wales, Cherelle is also a proud and devoted mum, neurodivergent, gender fluid, and biracial, amongst many other things. Coming from social disadvantage and with few opportunities available to her, Cherelle had a chaotic upbringing, and so she searched for safety and security, which she found outside in communities rather than family. It's no surprise then that in her heart she holds a passion for equality and advocacy for marginalised identities. Paraphrasing Cherelle, she says, "I feel like all these categories that we're given, I've always been in the grey area. I've never fully slotted into one thing, which has been a blessing and a curse. I have what we call passing privilege, as in, I'm gender fluid, but I'm quite feminine presenting. Mixed race, but I'm light-skinned. I'm all these things that have a proximity to safety and acceptance, but I'm also not that. I'm also many things. My identity has always been complex. Not for me, but for other people." So I was thinking before we started this morning, how do I introduce you? How do I describe you? Because you are a counsellor, you are a supervisor, you are a trainer, you are recently, and again we'll come on to this I'm sure, you have been kind enough to take on the role of NCPS Regional Representative for Wales, and for our members and student members in Wales. And then of course there's all those other things which you've already sort of alluded to, mother, general human being, with all the complexities and experiences that come into that. So handing that over to you, slightly perhaps unfairly and unkindly, how would you choose to introduce yourself to people?
The question also comes into probably a neurodivergent mind as well, which is like, okay, all these options a lot. Immediately it all opens up. And I suppose the answer is, I have to think about the setting in which I'm answering that question and, who I'm trying to connect with. I would say that I am a professional working in the mental health space, I guess, in many different contexts, who is just really passionate about, equality, advocacy for marginalised identities. I guess I'd start from there.
Yeah. So in that professional context, that is, number one, what you do and how you would describe yourself, label yourself as a counsellor, as a professional, and also in that you've talked a little, obviously, about, you've alluded to where your passions lie, where your specialisms are, where your interests take you within that role. which again, I know we will come on to in due course in terms of your own background, your own lived experience, and then obviously in that regional context of where you live, where you are, and how that feeds into those experiences, perhaps. So do you mind me asking how long you've been working in this profession? And I always find it's really interesting to ask people how they came into this profession. What piqued your interest? What started you on that path of training, first and foremost, because we all understand what a big bite that is to take, what a chunk of commitment and work and self-reflection and learning we're taking on by doing that. So yeah, what got you into the profession, and what were you doing beforehand, if that's okay to ask?
Yeah, so I always wish there was a better sort of answer to what got me into it. I wish I'd kind of sought it out or something, but I think for many years I was kind of just going here and there and true ADHD style, doing bits and bobs and thinking, oh no, this is the thing for me, and I'd do it for a bit and then kind of it would die down and I'd do something else. And so, yeah, at the time, when I kind of, it piqued my interest, I was managing a restaurant. I was assistant manager of a chain of restaurants in Cardiff.
Okay.
And just being a mum, I had two little kids. So that had taken my focus for quite a while. And, I had also spent a long time in my life, many years, just trying to find security, I suppose, and had a very chaotic upbringing, had to grow up very, very fast. So I hadn't been able to pursue, I had a lot of dreams, a lot of things that I would have loved to have done. I would have loved to have gone to university when I was younger, but it wasn't my life. It wasn't accessible to me at that time. So yeah, I guess I'd found myself, as in a place of security where I could then start to think seriously about what is it that I want to pursue. So I tried a few different things, I guess, little courses and, whatever, to try and see what piqued my interest. And then, yeah, down the road from me in the little village where I live, there was a just level 1 counselling, introduction to counselling course, which was really accessible for me. It was in the evening, quite cheap. And I thought, I'll just go along and give that a try. And I just fell in love with it. On obviously, level 1 is very, it's just, you don't really get into it at that point. But I realised actually that I had been studying humans my whole life, because of my life, because I'd had to, and to stay safe and to kind of, and because of my neurodivergence as well, I had been studying people very closely for a long time. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, some of, what I've learned, some of my skills and experience feel quite valuable here. And so, I did that. I went on to level 2 and so on. And just, it kind of, at the start, it didn't feel like a big, I'm going into this big, obviously it's very expensive, time consuming, energy consuming. But for me, I think it was just one step at a time, and it just, I was hooked, and each level just felt more and more, wow, I was getting words for things. I kind of knew a lot of, the theory work and things. I kind of knew these things, but it was giving it to me in a different language. And yeah, so that's kind of how I got into it. And it's been one hell of a journey, because I have, as it is with anyone, I guess, but I've also been on my own trauma recovery journey and figuring out my own identity, and had all of that personal evolution, which is so closely tied in with my work. So yeah, that's kind of how it started.
That's so interesting. And please don't worry, we're never looking for, the big meaningful necessarily answers, but you're reminding me actually of a previous conversation I had with another one of our sort of friends and members, Ailish Craig, who's based in Northern Ireland. And she described a slightly similar journey, never quite feeling like she landed where she really felt she needed to be. And then just pure chance almost taking on, a level 1 or level 2 counselling course. Like you say, it was cheap, it was convenient, and just that thing clicking. And I love how you described it for yourself in terms of recognising that actually what it was about human beings, human relationships, understanding ourselves and each other. And if I'm understanding from what you're saying, it was then this sort of almost, like you say, not this big plan or feeling necessary that it was a big commitment or investment, but actually it sounds like you're describing quite an organic process, which actually it's that word curiosity, isn't it? You complete your level 1, it's like, I want more. I want to know what happens next almost, isn't it? In this story, in this pathway of learning.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I feel so incredibly lucky that I have this relationship with my work, because that is what it is. It's a relationship that has been, really a source of so much for me over the years, and has had such an evolution and is always changing even now. So yeah, and it also, for me, the fact that I have this relationship with my work and it can evolve, and I never quite know what next year is going to look like, in terms of my client group, my work, any consulting, there's always more. And for a brain like mine, that's a treat. That is what I need, I think.
Absolutely. Always evolving, always something new to learn. I suppose obviously our CPD as well as our own personal interests and specialisms, present new things to us all the time, don't they? And I completely agree with that. It never gets boring, does it? That's for sure. And look, again, I know we're going to come on to talking about things like, neurodiversity, and we'll come on to talking about intersectionality and all of these sorts of things. And, if I look back to my training sort of 20 odd years ago, they weren't even words really that were in the sort of the general vocabulary, never mind in our training. And so obviously, importantly and necessarily, these are things that are starting to come into our line of vision, and that's brilliant. That's great. That can only be a good thing. The other thing that really struck me about what you said there, Cherelle, is that part of the reason why you hadn't considered or been able to do this work perhaps slightly earlier in your life had been, I know this wasn't the word you used yourself, but essentially it sounds like you were saying, all I could do at that point was just survive. I just needed to feel a sense of stability and security for myself, for my children, and thinking sort of in that Maslow type way, that hierarchy of needs, that when we're in that vein, it does limit us sometimes, doesn't it? It does prevent us from perhaps exploring or pursuing some of those other things that ideally we would love to have been able to do. But actually, we've just got to knuckle down and focus. And I wondered what that was like for you, that experience of, when you look at what you've just said, you've said, look at my career now and how it's always changing, always evolving, always bringing something new and interesting for me, and how much that suits my personality and my own makeup. And on the other side of that scale, we've got your life before that, which was one of survival. What can you tell us about the differences in those two times of your life and how that was for you?
Yeah, I mean, saying that there are two times of my life, it feels so like, I mean, I've had 10 lifetimes, it feels, in this, from there to now. So it's so difficult sometimes for me even to compute what was going on at certain times, I did try when I left, so I left where I was living when I was 15. And I tried after I left school to do my A-levels. So I did law and English, things that I was really passionate about and loved, psychology. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't make it to the 2 years. I studied so hard, but I was living in bedsits and doing 3 jobs and just alone in the world, and turning up to a classroom of students who had, for the most part, what I considered normal lives. So just turning up, you feel like you're turning up at a disadvantage, and trying to just juggle so many things, and also trying to keep it to yourself because, there's a lot of shame involved with, having a life that people don't understand. So it was difficult. That was really difficult. And I think, but also, I learned so much. I learned so much in those years. And that's when I say, I think I learned a lot about people in that time, not just because I was surviving, but also because I got my safety quite often from the communities that I was a part of, from the queer community, from people who had very little in terms of social support or, financial support. And so there was always a big focus on humans and connection and so I developed a lot of skills in that time. Thinking about from there to now, it's so strange to me. I mean, I have to, and I do also carry a lot of, I don't know whether guilt is the right word, but there's a feeling in me which connects me to that time in my life and people who are still experiencing those things, because I'm so far up from that now that I have to actively seek it. I have to actively seek the people who are, struggling. And so I feel like I try very hard to stay connected with some of my experiences, but it's difficult, it's difficult when you've come such a long way and life looks very different.
I often think of that analogy of a Russian doll, with all the little other versions of that doll inside it. I remember, if I look back to my teenage years, when I went through a very difficult time, and when I came out the other side, perhaps in my sort of early mid-20s, I remember I would say to myself, and I would openly say to those close to me, I don't want to ever forget what I've just been through and what that felt like. It feels really important to me to hold on to some remnants of that, because that informs who I am. It will form who I am going forward. But like you say, it's one thing to say that and to recognize the importance of that version of yourself, of that doll inside of you as you grow around it. But it's another thing doing it, isn't it? As your life evolves and progresses, and hopefully, I know, we all encounter other and new challenges as time goes on, but, just remembering those times of perhaps trauma or real vulnerability and insecurity and uncertainty, can feel important, but at the same time perhaps feel difficult to really stay connected to. And it's interesting you say that part of your way of doing that was to stay connected with communities, other people that some of those experiences felt shared with, and staying connected with them helped you stay connected with yourself? Is that what you mean?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think so. And also, I mean, it's easier for me now, you know, because I have a successful practice. I have more time, and I've done a lot of work on myself and my relationship with money, and, you know, because that's a factor as well, especially, you know, when I was, you know, I had a practice that was doing quite well, but not quite well enough for me to sort of have savings and, you know, sort of work on my relationship with money. So, you know, wanting to stay connected to your roots and to help people, but still having this like, oh, you know, I'm kind of on the cliff edge of, I could be there, you know, that was very difficult. That was very difficult to manage. So, you know, I'm very, very lucky that I'm now in a position where I do have that security, where now it feels very important to me. It feels like part of my purpose to show up fully in the places that I'm very privileged to be able to, you know, the tables I'm able to sit at and the conversations I'm able to be a part of. It's very important to me now that I have the security to show up fully and to talk about these things and to question things, you know, and to be a voice for a lot of people. So it feels much easier these days, but it's been one hell of a journey, you know, trying to keep that along the way.
What do you think 15-year-old Cherelle would say, seeing where you are now?
Oh, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine. Yeah, I do. I mean, I personally love, so one approach, you know, one therapeutic approach that I love is family systems, internal family systems. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I've had a lot of that therapy myself, and I like, you know, parts work, and I'm very much a systems thinker. So yeah, I do quite often. I mean, I have a relationship with the parts of me. I have a relationship with, you know, parts of me from different, you know, points in my life. And yeah, I do. It's really hard to know. It's really hard. I mean, I could not have imagined my life now. I could not have imagined it. And that's not to say that it's like, you know, by some people's standards, perhaps it's not that, you know, incredible. But for me, it's beyond what I could have imagined. So yeah, it's sort of, yeah, it's difficult to say. It's difficult to say. But I knew that I had potential, and that's what's so difficult when you're a young person who has, you know, a lot of interest, quite an expansive mind. I was always an avid reader. I devoured books. You know, I was reading novels when I was very young. I always was just so interested in so many things. I love science, you know, so many things, but I didn't have any sort of guidance or, you know, the relational safety or, you know, I just didn't have the capacity really to for any of those things to evolve, to make space for any of that. So, yeah, I feel so incredibly grateful that now I can do that. And I'm still now, you know, delving into things that I've been thinking about since I was a little girl. So
yeah, oh, that's so lovely to hear. And I imagine part of that, and again, obviously you've already alluded to it, and I suggested we'd come back to that, is very much about, I was going to say identity, which obviously is an understandable word to use, but I think as I feel I'm coming to know you as you know, we work together a little more closely, is just that sense of who you are and why you are who you are. I can barely imagine the complexities of that, and the way that may have come about over time in your life. I don't know at what age you may have started questioning that sense of self, or recognizing, you know, you talked about being in your A-level classes, and already that sense of difference or of otherness that you certainly felt at that time. Yeah, well, is there any way you can help us understand what that whole process has been like, and what parts of you have come into that are now sat all together talking to me right now?
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, it's lovely, actually. It reminds me of like what the interview that I had with you, and I said to you, this is so lovely because this is an opportunity. I really felt like I could show up as my whole self.
Yeah.
Which is, I'd probably never had an interview in my life like that. I could never show up as my whole self. I always had to be selective about what I was showing. My whole life, so, when you've got things going on at home that are not great, you know that you can't bring that to other places. And, there's an element of hiding. There's lots of different ways that I've hidden, and which has always been my experience, always. So in terms of, I always knew that I thought differently and I saw things differently. I didn't know, I had no idea about neurodivergence or whatever. I just knew that I saw things differently to other people. And I also knew that, I'm mixed race, and I didn't really know any other Black people until I was like in my teens. So I kind of knew that I was different in that respect, but my dad wasn't around, so I didn't have that in front of me. I just knew that it was something about me that was a bit different. And I feel like all these categories that we're given, I've always been in the grey area. I've never fully slotted in to one thing, which has been a blessing and a curse, because I've had to mask. I've had to be selective and choose. And quite often, because I'm quite, I have what we call passing privilege, as in, I'm gender fluid, but I'm quite feminine presenting, mixed race, but I'm light skinned. I'm all these things that, I have a proximity to safety, and acceptance. But I'm also not that. I'm also many things. So it's been complex. My identity has always been complex, not for me, but for other people. So, I'm still, if I think about how to define myself, it depends who I'm talking to. And for many people, the level of safety, the level of, how is this person in front of me, all these people are going to best understand me and react to me in a way that's safe and okay. So, and I think that's the case for many people. It's the case for many of my clients, that identity isn't fixed and it's relational and it's complex. And, many people have had therapy that maybe isn't so aware of that, there's none of that there's not a lot of that training. Certainly I haven't seen any, when people are training to become counsellors, that sort of awareness of just divergence in identity in so many ways. And when it's like so intersectional, there's so many different bits, it's so hard to, you don't want to have these big conversations all the time as well when you're showing up. You just want to show up. But that's quite hard when, there's a risk of being misunderstood, or somebody might just assume I'm a certain way. And then it's up to me whether I correct it or not. Just, up until, recent years, I never really would, and then that's quite isolating. So it's a really complex answer to a complex question. And, there isn't a one answer, really.
It's a brilliant answer. It's so beautifully described, I think, Cherelle. And that sense as well, what you've just finished on there, saying, how much do I explain? How much do I disclose? Do I want to? Why should I have to? And then we're sat working that out, aren't we? And then there's the effort that takes. That's what I always think of, the effort that it takes sometimes just to explain something to another person that may not even be necessary really to explain, but we feel that sense that we should or we have to be understood. It's so complex, it's so much. And then again, as you so rightly say, sometimes for what feels like in that moment, self-preservation, a preservation of energy, of protecting our own vulnerability, safety, we choose to perhaps withhold some of these things about ourselves. And then, as you so beautifully put it, we then just feel a little bit disconnected or very disconnected. We feel, the word you used was isolated. I mean, what a dilemma, to have to be always weighing these things up is such a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a strange thing also to be to be in sort of grey areas, never to be fully in the middle of something, but on the outskirts, you kind of get to see, like I would have experiences where I'd be at a friend's house as a child and somebody would be using racial slurs like in front of me, and they would be like, okay, well, what does this mean? Like, does that mean they're assuming that I'm like them, or is it that part of me is like they're speaking to part of me, or and on both sides, on different sides. So it's really confusing actually as a young person, because it's like, well, where do I sit? And people often feel okay to assume that I'm fitting in with them, as long as I stay quiet. And that's a lot of responsibility for a young person to either, and also when in your life you've had to stay quiet to stay safe a lot of the time, it's really difficult then to address things. It's really difficult to speak up. So yeah. And and that's why I love, my clients are, very diverse, very a mix of, people of all intersections and, all different walks of life, and, many sort of people who have quite a complex relationship with their identity and the world. And I just adore holding a space for that, because because it's, it's kind of naturally what I've always been doing, but to offer somebody else that space, it's beautiful to see what can come from it,
Yeah, that sense of watching somebody sort of come into themselves, isn't it? Given the right opportunity at the right time and given that safe space. I hope for most of us that we never tire of just seeing somebody. You used a word earlier for yourself, actually, you used the word potential. And that's a word I really like, especially actually when it's working with sort of teenagers, young adults, and just seeing that potential that perhaps they don't even see themselves, perhaps, or can't connect with, or have never been encouraged, have been squashed down, or have been kept quiet, been kept in a box, like you say, for safety or for any manner of reasons. And to watch that, to nurture it and watch that develop and grow is such a beautiful thing, isn't it? It's wonderful. It really is.
And I think there's such a pressure, especially for young people, there's such a pressure to be certain. Even when we're making space for different identities, you have to be certain. And growing up is not, we're not certain. We need a space to explore ourselves and to really get ourselves. We need the space to be uncertain, whether it's about gender or different things. We need to have a safe space in which we can explore and not have to have the answer immediately. So that then the answer can come from your body and from your experience, not just from, just having to, the pressure of trying to be understood or validated, You've
mentioned your experiences particularly being mixed race. and what that was like for you in childhood, and now you've obviously talked about gender identity, and I know that's something that's very personal to you as well. Is there any light that you can shine on that experience, that personal experience for yourself, that can help us understand where you're coming from in that personally?
Yeah, I mean, I would describe myself as gender fluid. Mm-hmm. What that means to me, I guess, is ever changing, you know. And I always knew that, you know, I've gone through different stages of trying to figure this out, really. I always knew that, to me, gender was performative. It felt like I was expected to do these certain things as a girl. And it just felt so strange to me. I could never understand it. I couldn't understand that, you know, a lot of my traits and how I naturally showed up were seen as quite masculine. But then it was just easier for me if I did these things that were expected of me. So, and also, you know, when you're trying to be safe and you're trying to be understood, you take the easiest route a lot of the time, you know, the path of least resistance.
Absolutely.
And so that creates this like dissonance that, you know, without language or a safe place to explore, you just don't really know what that is. You just know that what you're doing is not really, doesn't feel right. So yeah, as I've gotten older, I've just been able to explore that at length. You know, I also think there's a relationship between how I see gender and my neurodivergence as well, you know. But I am now, you know, in a very privileged position of having a wonderful community and lots of beautiful people in my life who, you know me for me, you know. And so gender for me is something that I love to have conversations about, but it's not something that feels important to me. My gender doesn't feel important to me unless I'm being oppressed as a result of somebody's assumption of my gender. So
brilliantly said.
Yeah. So, and the same with a lot of things. I mean, labels to me are a way to just communicate. For me, it's more about communication and connection. I don't need labels. I don't need them myself. I often feel quite restricted by them, you know. So they're just a way to help other people understand according to their frame of reference, in my mind. Not to say that's the same for everybody. I mean, of course, everyone has their own relationship with labels, and you have to find what's right for you. But yeah, for me, I felt a real, I suppose, a weight lifted when I was just like, actually, I don't need to find the right thing. I can find the closest thing that generally fits, and that's okay for me. That's okay. I feel like I speak for myself. You know, myself is at the forefront of me now. So I feel like people generally connect to me because of me. And then, you know, it's another reason why I'm quite good at connecting with people, no matter what their frame of reference is. So I suppose I put that connection first, and then however open someone is, I'll then decide whether I let them in, and I'm a bit more open with them. And I love to challenge people's, you know, gently and safely, to challenge people's language and their understanding of certain things. Because once you've got a connection with someone and they feel safe, then you can bring up something that's just a little bit outside of their comfort zone, but have a conversation, a back and forth. And that's how change happens, isn't it? You know,
Absolutely.
That is how change happens. And it's a lovely thing. It's a lovely thing to be able to do that.
And how refreshing and how lovely to hear somebody. I often think the most perfect answer, if somebody just sort of say, you know, tell me a bit about yourself, or who are you? And you just sort of say, well, I'm just me. You know, I'm Faye, you're Cherelle, and that's, you know, what else is there? This is who I am, and what you see and what I'm presenting is who I am without those labels. And it feels like you're really at that place now where you're like, I'm me, and I'm okay with that. And any other way I describe myself is simply for the most part, to help other people relate to me and me to relate to them in some way.
Absolutely. And that really makes me think about my training as well, because I know, I trained integrative, so many different models. And quite often I just felt that, I'd be asked, so where are you in this? Like, tell me about you. You'd be doing, I don't know, genograms or whatever it is. So to place yourself, I'd be like, but there isn't really a place for me there. Like, because of my experiences and my identity, I don't feel I can, or I can't fully bring myself to this exercise. And quite often, if not all the time, those sort of things, even though I'm quite happy to explore and really, what does that mean to me, and write, and, I love exploration of self. But quite often it was met with, well, you don't know yourself then, because I can't fit myself into this mold. But actually, I think that is me knowing myself, but quite often I have to know myself through what I'm not, because what I am is not an option there. So that's another thing that kind of, I'm quite passionate about, is like bringing more of an understanding of complex identities to training as well, because, especially with neurodivergence, people may have a different relationship with self, and that's okay. That's okay. And it's important for us as practitioners to understand that, I think.
I think in time, training, I hope, will evolve and develop even more so to include so much of this stuff, whether that's about race, culture, neurodivergence, all of these things that we're talking about today, gender and identity, because it does need to catch up, and as valid and as interesting and as useful, I think, as some of that, the theory that we are still bringing into training is, a lot of it is still quite old. When you think back, the more time goes on, that so much of this stuff was written actually such a long time ago. And again, that's not invalidating it at all. And of course, we must continue to use those building blocks and foundations of understanding, but we do need to move and progress more, I think, and develop that more quickly. And so we need to catch up, I think, in some aspects. And again, I really need to acknowledge that that's a very broad, sweeping statement, and that there's lots of different training out there, but yeah, on the whole, a lot of those texts and approaches and theories that we use are based, in a society and culture and understanding of human beings that could be considered quite outdated now.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that, it kind of reminds me, what that brings up for me is also, so I also have a chronic illness. So I have Crohn's disease, which has also been a journey for me. There's so many elements, but, the mind-body connection. And it was so interesting to me that it was so, when I got into my trauma recovery, and I tried many different therapists and types of therapy and whatever, and I came to an understanding that my mind and my body were so connected. And actually what was happening was I had one really amazing session of internal family systems, where I was wondering about the part of me that would binge, that would eat too much. And, it would usually be if I was get a bit exhausted or burn out, I would be eating. And what came out of this session, completely out of the blue, I was completely outside of my awareness, was that I have this part of me, or, did have this part of me that would eat to the point of wanting to be ill. It was connected to my Crohn's disease, which I had no idea about at the time. I didn't know. And it was because I wanted to be looked after. And this part of me kind of told me that kind of this is what it's doing. And memories came back to me from childhood when I would do things kind of hurt myself because there was nobody around to look after me. I thought, well, maybe if I went to hospital or something, somebody would look after me. They would notice me. They would know, and they would come to me. And I thought, wow, how incredible that I've been carried this part for so long, and it's manifested in, a disease like this. I spent months in and out of hospital with this disease when I was first diagnosed. And that was just a breakthrough for me. And I've had many breakthroughs like that. But one thing that really, really brings up for me is like the mind-body connection. And particularly with trauma, just how trauma can show up in the body and the impact they can have on your body, which I feel is just, I learned nothing about that in my training. And I've done lots of different training. I had to actively seek out that. And I think we know so much about that, the mind-body connection now, but it's something that I feel is missing.
It's funny, isn't it, when you think back to, the book that we will all know, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, and again, how old that is. And yet, and what a seminal text, and most of us will have read it and understood it at some point during our career, even if that wasn't necessarily in our training. And yet you're so right. It does feel like it's taken a long time for that to really start to filter through and become such what does feel like more now in terms of perhaps extra training and CPD. There are a lot of courses out there now, aren't they, about the body work, the somatic therapy that we can learn more about. But at what point does that go into our core training? I really want to thank you not only for being so open about your own experiences and what that's been like for you to live through your earlier years and to end up, well, I say end up, it's never a destination, is it? It's always changing, as we've said. But, where you are at now, where we are meeting you right now at this point in your life. So thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you also, Cherelle, for doing that in such an eloquent and clear way. You've described it also so beautifully. So thank you. I suppose perhaps it leaves us now to coming into the here and now, and where your path has very recently just moved you to, and that's something I mentioned earlier in terms of your representing the NCPS in Wales and being that point of contact for members there and helping us understand more about the challenges that our Welsh contingents may have, whether trainers, students, organisations, anybody we work with there. So in a very open and very broad terms, particularly actually for anybody listening to this that isn't in Wales or from Wales, how would you go about helping us understand what life is like living and working in Wales within mental health as a counsellor or psychotherapist?
Thank you, firstly, for, holding this space for me and having me. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Absolute pleasure.
I guess, I'm always going to be coming into it, into anything I do through my own eyes on side, through my own experience. So I know I have a particular interest in the sort of the lack of diversity within the profession in Wales, the difficulty with people getting access to sort of safe, trained, informed, or people with lived experience of, different identities and things like that, especially in rural areas. Obviously, there's a big disparity between, the big cities and the rural areas in Wales. So that's something that's specific to us. There's as I suppose, as I imagine in other places too, there are some disparities in terms of, racial disparities, or, it's depending on your identity is depending on, what's available to you.
Mm-hmm.
I think, for me now in Wales, we have a new mental health and wellbeing strategy, which is 2025 to 2035 over the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of different parts of that which are interesting. There are a lot of new things happening. So we've got like new hubs and just lots of new initiatives, but they're kind of in the pilot stages, I think, for the most part. So there's lots of things kind of at the beginning, or lots of things beginning in Wales. So it's quite a good time for us to be, just putting your ear to the ground and figuring out how NCPS members can be a part of some of these initiatives, maybe.
Yeah.
I think, for me, I live in Wales, and, a good chunk of my work is in London, because it's difficult for me to be connected with the clients that need me in Wales.
Oh, I see.
So, and I think that's true of quite a few people, that work with, or that I know. I think it would be good for there to be a bit more joined up working in Wales, like there are these like nationwide initiatives, but there's also, the needs on the ground. So connecting those things, it would be great to sort of have some sort of part in that.
It's finding, isn't it, where there are, as government initiatives start to change, and of course that's different. We've got the devolved nations, hence the reasons for our regional representatives, and obviously then England. It's trying to work out when all these ideas and initiatives come from, for want of a better phrase, the top, and working out where opportunities and roles are for counsellors and psychotherapists within that, as there are so many new roles within the psychological professions, particularly in the statutory sector. It does feel sometimes, I think, like it's harder for us to find where's our place in this, while at the same time knowing that there's so much to offer. And again, those relational approaches, for the most part, that counsellors and psychotherapists will use, and just how important they are in the delivery of good mental health services. And it's having a voice in that, isn't it? It's having a place at the table and representing members in that, with those nuanced differences and understandings of somebody like yourself on the ground that knows what's going on in Wales through your colleagues, your peers, and the clients you see also. It's a big task, isn't it?
It sure is. It sure is. I'm very lucky that I have a good relationship with a lot of organisations and people that I've worked with and do work with. So that's a good starting point. But there's so much to know. And I guess for me now, it's just a stage of being open and having conversations, and hopefully, people getting in touch with me and figuring out, what's my next move? What's our next move? How can I best use this time?
Yeah. Our philosophy has always been, as most people know, and often the reason why people would choose NCPS as their professional body is because we're proud of listening to our members, being member-led, and absolutely it's important for us to try and work out what our members in Wales need, and again, trainers and colleges and everybody that plays a part in this system, that what is it they want us to do better or more of, or whatever that might be, and hopefully together we can find some answers to that, and put some plans in place that will then move things forward. Thankfully, with the help of people like yourself. So we really appreciate you taking on this role. And I know we're recording this when very early July, and we're right at those initial stages. We've still even at this point yet to go out to members and formally introduce you, and this will be part of that too when this podcast goes out. But it's bear with us. We'll find our way. We'll open things up so that people can get in touch and start moving things forward from there. So thank you. It's an exciting part of the next stage for the society, for you obviously in your own professional development and our relationship with each other. So all good stuff, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely.
Thank you, Cherelle, for talking to us today, and thank you for listening in. You can find a link to the NCPS Regional Representative webpage in the show notes below. This podcast is brought to you by the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, a professional home for counsellors, psychotherapists, and over 120 wellbeing organisations across the UK. Autonomy, diversity, creativity and community are at the heart of what we do. We're creating a positive space for conversations with people who share common beliefs and goals, because together our voice is louder. If you would like to know more about the NCPS, please visit www.ncps.com for more information. And please remember to follow and subscribe to this podcast so you're always part of the conversation.